Welcome to the asynchronous activity for INTD 100, the beginning of week 3. My name is Jordan Hansen, and today we practiced spatial detail, that is, using descriptive details that help the reader understand or picture a process or journey. And so pictured in figure 1 is the Science and Learning Center, my home as a researcher and a professor at the campus of Whittier College. And so question 1 in this activity states that in figure 1 we see a picture of the Science and Learning Center at Whittier College. Because we are undergoing a period of remote instruction, most of us have not seen inside this facility. Imagine therefore a laboratory inside the SLC in which you would like to perform scientific research. Using spatially descriptive detail, and that's the piece of this activity or question we're highlighting, explain how you would proceed there from the entrance shown in figure 1. Give one example of experimentation being done inside this lab that you find interesting. So I will give you example writing and then I will outline the main exercise of this activity. So first of all, I'll explain how to arrive at my personal laboratory within the Science and Learning Center. So we could say something like starting from the main entrance facing the north quad, which is the green grassy area you see pictured in front of you. This picture is taken facing one entrance of the Science and Learning Center. On the other side there's a parking lot, and on the two ends there's also special entrances as well. So starting from the main entrance facing the north quad, proceed forward to the glass-covered stairwell in the center of the lobby. Walk down to the first floor via the stairwell. Now I'm trying to remember it because it's been so long since I've walked down that stairwell, which way it faces you when you exit it. I believe it faces the parking lot on the other side, and so what I'll say is walk down to the first floor via the stairwell and turn right. In front of you will be actually I'll just say, using the lessons of last week, using concise writing, I'll just say proceed down the hallway and enter the first laboratory on the left hand side. Walk around the table and sit at the desktop in front of the computer screen. Now the second part of the prompt says, give one example of experimentation being done inside this lab that you find interesting. So for example, we could say how about say on top of the simply on the desktop, so I'm keeping it concise. On the desktop, we see integrated circuit boards containing firmware designed to process radio frequency digitized signals from detectors deployed in Antarctica. It's a hard word to spell, Antarctica. This firmware is programmed to identify strange and new radio frequency signals from deep space that emanate, did I spell that right? There's no way I spelled that right. Emanate from the Antarctic ice shelves. So this is, I don't expect you to understand exactly what that means, but it is about scientific research. And I'm sure that many of you have curiosity about particular fields of research going on within the Scientific Learning Center, Science Learning Center. And so what I want you to do is use your imagination. Since we have to be remote, use your imagination and picture the lab inside, and then proceed there with your writing, and then tell me what kind of research is going on inside that lab. And so I want you to answer this question. In addition, the main exercise is now in question 2. And this one is much more general, and I want you to give me maybe let's say 200 to 300 words to answer this one. Imagine you had the resources and space available to construct your own laboratory facility. Using spatial detail, describe exactly how it would be constructed and how it would function. So I'll hit the highlights here. What I mean by how it would be constructed is not specifically how would it be built or put together. Instead, what I mean is what would it look like when completed? So, for example, answering questions like where are the labs? What is in the labs? Specifically, what equipment or tools are inside these labs? Are there any creatures inside these labs? What is the general purpose of the laboratory, and how does it work? But specifically there, let's say that if you wanted to do some of this work, like where would you go? So the key here is use spatial detail. Imagine a situation where you in your imagination construct the laboratory, and then you're describing where the labs are. Maybe you can talk about, like, the shape of the building, so the reader gets a sense of where the labs are relative to each other, and then perhaps things like details like how large or small are these labs. Then we use spatial details so that if someone were to actually go in your imagined building and try to perform one of the experiments that you are imagining, would they be able to do that, or at least conceive of how they were going to do that? So once again, answer the first question. In Figure 1, we see a picture of the Science and Learning Center at Whittier College, so we answered with a short tract of writing describing how to specifically get to my lab in there, and then an example of research being done in that lab that you find interesting. We're going to talk a little bit more about the writing. I'm giving myself a moment or two to let that sit there before editing it. And then the main exercise is to build an entire laboratory in your mind, and then describe to me where are the labs, what's in the labs, what's the general purpose, and what research is going on inside those labs, using as much spatial detail as possible. So if I were to draw, for example, if I were to draw your laboratory, would I get it correct? Would I draw something, a floor plan, a picture of the inside of one of your labs you're describing? How close would my representation of your idea be, given what you've told me in your writing? So now let's take a look at now that I've let that sit there for a moment, again, using the lessons from the leadership essay at West Point that we read about letting your first idea kind of sit there and then coming back to it. So I say starting from the main entrance facing the north quad. So there is a little bit of ambiguity about what that word means, facing. If the reader is facing, like, who's doing the facing? If the reader is facing the north quad, well, their back is to the Science and Learning Center. And the doors, technically they're just a two-dimensional thing, so they could face inward or outward. So I think it might be a little more clear as I edit my own writing. So saying starting from the main entrance, I could say that faces the north quad. So by replacing facing with that faces, maybe that is more evocative, like it's the entrance that faces the north quad, not the reader. Starting from the main entrance that faces the north quad, proceed forward to the glass-covered stairwell. So this phrase bothered me as I wrote it. I'm not sure people know what I mean by that, and is it even necessary? There is only one stairwell visible from the lobby, but you wouldn't know that unless you were there. There is another staircase or stairwell behind a door if you go through a door to proceed to the upper floors, but the stairwell that I'm describing specifically takes you down to the first floor only. So instead of just cutting that word, glass-covered stairwell, perhaps I could instead say spiral staircase in the center of the lobby. So if I say spiral staircase, I think that there's literally zero ambiguity about what I mean. If you were to go there, you'd see there's exactly one spiral staircase. And when I say a spiral staircase, this detailed word here, spiral, you know what I mean by a spiral. That's a shape. There's only one kind of spiral. So proceed forward to the spiral staircase in the center of the lobby. Walk down to the first floor via the stairwell. So to keep myself consistent, I should say staircase and turn right. So if I say staircase here, then I should also repeat myself and say staircase there. Walk down to the first floor via the staircase and turn right. Proceed down the hallway. Now, I'm picturing what it looks like in my mind, and I think I could do a little bit better than proceed down the hallway by maybe adding a little bit of detail here. So the hallway doesn't begin until like there's a space between the staircase and the hallway. So if I said walk forward after turning right and proceed down the hallway. Now I've added some words to this sentence, and so this comma might be in trouble. Perhaps I will consider splitting the sentence like this. Walk forward after turning right and proceed down the hallway, period, and then just capitalizing enter and changing that to a direction, like enter the first laboratory on the left-hand side. Maybe I can add another spatial detail here so that my lab has a window, like one of the walls is just a window facing the hallway. So enter the first laboratory on the left-hand side with the large window. So that would distinguish it from let's say, the lab following mine, which does not have a window. So I'm adding a descriptive detail there, which is spatial in nature with the large window. It has a large window covering one of the walls. Walk around the table. As I wrote this, I felt like that, walk around, like the table could mean any number of things in my lab. There's tables, benches, chairs, there's like a fume hood and a table facing a cabinet. There's also a small little subroom. So what exactly do I mean by that? What I should say is I should replace this word with something more descriptive spatially. So walk, let's say walk around behind the large lab bench. Notice our tendency in the first week and the second week was to cut sentences. Now we're adding them back a little bit, but we're adding them back with spatial detail only. Walk around behind the large lab bench and sit at the desktop in front of the computer screen. As I wrote this word, I felt like that was not the perfect word to write. Instead, I could be a little bit more consistent, or since I've already said lab bench in the same exact sentence, I could actually just cut this. Walk around behind the large lab bench and sit in front of the computer screen. Let's look at what it looked like before. Walk around behind the large lab bench and sit at the desktop in front of the computer screen. That's a little bit longer, and it almost is kind of confusing. Like, is there a desktop and a lab bench? Or if I said lab bench twice, am I referring to the same one? It's actually simpler just to cut that phrase. Notice I've added and cut and added and cut, so my paragraph actually has decreased in length a little bit, and yet it's becoming more clear as we edit it. Enter the first laboratory on the left-hand side with the large window. Walk around behind the large lab bench and sit in front of the computer screen. I could replace large with, for example, wide lab bench, and that might be a little bit better. Give one example of experimentation being done inside this lab that you find interesting. So on the desktop, so I should, to stay consistent with what I've said before, on the lab bench, we see integrate circuit boards. That's a typo. I should say integrated. We see integrated circuit boards. Now, we'll cover more passive voice next week, but I could just say here, there are integrated circuit boards, so take ourselves out of it. Notice in this first paragraph, I don't think I've said you or we or I. I've just left the subject in the abstract. On the lab bench, there are integrated circuit boards containing firmware designed to process radio frequency digitized signals from detectors deployed in Antarctica. This firmware is programmed to identify strange and new radio frequency signals from deep space that emanate from the Antarctic ice shelves. I've repeated myself here, and if I say they are processing radio frequency digitized signals from detectors, that's not going to change, mid-sentence or mid-paragraph, so I can delete that, and it's implied that it's still, radio frequency as opposed to optical or some other frequency. This firmware is programmed to identify strange and new signals from deep space that emanate from the Antarctic ice shelves. That's a little ambiguous. That needs to be cleaned up a little bit there. Is the source of the signals the ice or deep space? So what I need to say here is identify strange and new signals originating from subatomic particles from deep space that radiate once they hit the Antarctic ice shelves. So maybe that actually makes more sense to the reader who's just not an expert in my particular field of science. So if I now concatenate here and make that into one paragraph, I think that if you read that paragraph from start to finish, you'd have a decent chance of understanding my lab. And so that's what I want you to do. I want you to answer this first question like that, only just, imagine a lab that does some interesting research that you find interesting, and then I want you to build a lab and give me I would say 200 to 300 words. So not too long. I mean, we're talking maybe half a page, 2/3 of a page here. Nothing extraordinarily long, but enough space to get the job done. Okay, so that is our asynchronous activity for week 3, practicing spatial description and science writing. This is College Writing Seminar INTD 100. My name is Professor Jordan Hansen. With any questions, you can email me at jhansen2@whittier.edu. Thank you.